Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at one of the stakes on Saturday at Keeneland. Race 10 is the Grade 3 Lexington, going a mile and a 16th for the 3-year-olds. And this is the last chance for these 3-year-olds to qualify for the Kentucky Derby. And this year, Craig, it does seem like there is potential for maybe one or two 3-year-olds to actually vault into the Kentucky Derby field from this Lexington. There are horses running in this race that do have some points already. And while the Lexington only awards 20 qualifying points to the winner, that could potentially be enough for horses to get into the field, particularly the number 5 Hades, who already has 30 points. And if he's able to win this Lexington, 50 would be enough to get into the Kentucky Derby starting gate. But some connections did have to alter their plans to make this race part of the schedule.
For sure. Maybe we see Hades get in, as we've seen in derbies past. Sometimes as we get closer and closer to the race, that threshold to get in gets lower and lower. So maybe even a couple others. But I don't think this is going to be any cakewalk for Hades. He is the second choice on the morning line, but it's drawn a pretty tough group of improving 3-year-olds.
The morning line favorite is actually the number 2, the Wine Steward, who we have not seen since October of his 2-year-old season when he was a good second over this Keeneland course in the Breeders' Futurity. We'll see what we get from him coming off the long layoff. 10 runners signed on for this Lexington. Do note that the number 7, Ever Do It, did compete in an allowance race on Wednesday this week at Keeneland. So I think it's expected he's probably not going to run in both spots, but no official word yet on whether he is going to be coming out of this race. Let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector to get a sense of how these horses might sort themselves out heading into the back stretch at the half-mile pole. And the number 10, Lucky Jeremy, is shown on the front end, Craig, and kind of looking through the PPs and the relative running styles of these horses, it does feel like he should be able to clear this field and get over to the front from his outside post position. He's got good gate speed. He's been forwardly placed in most of his prior starts, including some races that have featured faster paces.
Yes, for sure. When I first saw this pace projector and saw the 10 horse clear, I was wondering just how he would pull that off. It's kind of a short run into the first turn at Keeneland. But when you look at the horses shown in behind, they all have some question marks. The 6 horse, How's Your Attitude, has only run on the synthetic. He's shown speed there, but who knows if it'll translate to dirt. Hades, in my opinion, is probably the one most likely to press him, as he has shown speed, but he doesn't really have the pace figures that we've seen from Lucky Jeremy.
Do note, though, and it's shown in the Timeform US pace projector, that Hades is adding blinkers for this race, so we'll see if that gives him a little more gate speed to potentially get forward in this spot. Let's go through this field in post position order, beginning with the number 1, Secret Chat, and he is making just the 4th start of his career, so relatively lightly raced. All of his prior starts have come at Gulfstream Park in Florida, and he's run pretty well each time. He was a visually impressive debut winner by 7 lengths in August of his 2-year-old season. Went to the sidelines for a period of a few months after finishing second in October, came back off the layoff in mid-March, Craig, and put forth a decent effort to be a non-threatening second in that race. He's got to get a little faster to be taken seriously in this spot, and he also has to get out of the gate, because you can kind of see it in the comment lines on the right side of his Timeform US PPs. He's broken a little bit slowly or had trouble at the start every time.
And that could really be problematic from the rail at Keeneland with that short run to the first turn that I mentioned. I thought his return was pretty good. He's a horse who's yet to try 2 turns, but he did go the 1-turn mile at Gulfstream and ran fine that day. He was caught a little wide last time, so I would expect some improvement off that 101 that we see in his return. Just not sure if he can improve all the way up to a number that's going to be needed to win this race. We have the race rating at a 113, so I would suspect it's going to take at least that much.
Number 2 is the Wine Steward, and we'll take a look at his most recent appearance, which was all the way back in October of his 2-year-old season, when he was a very good second in the Grade 1 Breeders' Futurity, going this same mile and a 16th distance behind Locke, who at the time looked like one of the most talented 2-year-olds in the country. Now, Locke ran the better race than the Wine Steward on this day because he had to cover more ground on the turns, but you could see the Wine Steward is battling back pretty gamely coming onto the wire, as these two finished well ahead of the rest, improved his Timeform US speed figure all the way up to a 115 in his first attempt, going long on the dirt, Craig. So even though he had been campaigned as a sprinter through much of his 2-year-old campaign, it seemed like he handled the added ground as a younger horse, and we'll see if he's ready to build on that form now, first start as a 3-year-old.
Yeah, that speed figure certainly fits in here, and it's certainly proved to be pretty legitimate. Locked ran just fine in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Um, Trainer Mike Maker actually does well. I was surprised when I looked him up in Formulator when he returns horses off of 180 plus day layoffs on the dirt. He does well. He does well in routes. The one question mark is he really hasn't ever tried it in graded stakes. So it seems like, I don't know if they're just shooting for the $400,000 purse here, which would be a good sign, or trying to get in the Derby, but that seems a bit of a stretch because he only has 5 points at the moment.
Yeah, and he obviously missed a lot of time. He's a horse that I think the connections would have loved to have on the Kentucky Derby trail, but he's just gotten a late start to his 3-year-old campaign. So we'll see if he can be ready off the long layoff. The number 3 is Dilger, and we'll take a look at his most recent start when he broke his maiden in his 4th attempt at Gulfstream Park. Now, this was just his second dirt race because they had actually started this horse out on the turf. Unsurprisingly, I mean, he's a son of Lope de Vega, so it makes sense to start him on the turf, but didn't do much running on that surface, switched over to the dirt, and while he wasn't much of a factor in his first attempt on it behind Top Connor, that was a pretty salty maiden field, and here he met what was probably a slightly weaker group, but got the job done, improving his time form US speed figure. Just feels like he'd have to take yet another step forward to be competitive against this tougher group.
He would have to take another step forward. He goes back to 2 turns. He tried it on the turf once when he obviously wasn't handling the surface very well. But yeah, I mean, I could see him making a run late, but he's another, much like Secret Chat, that has to take a pretty big jump forward.
The number 4 is Footprint, a horse who has had plenty of experience. This will be the 8th start of his career for trainer Ken McPeak. Won his career debut, but since then has lost 6 in a row, including a couple of stakes attempts. Wasn't really a factor in the gun runner going all the way back to December of last year behind the likes of Track Phantom and Nash. Ran well in a couple of allowance races at Oaklawn Park over the winter, closing, but seemed to hang a little bit in the late stages too back. And you kind of saw something similar in the Rushaway last time where it seemed like he had dead aim at the top of the stretch and couldn't forge past, and just feels like this horse has been settling for minor awards a few times, Craig, and now he's stepping up to face a tougher field again.
And as a speed figure guy, he hasn't really taken many steps forward with his speed figures. I mean, he did run a career best 108.2 back on the dirt behind Seize the Gray, but not really taking the big steps forward you want to see from a 3-year-old that would signal to me he's ready to get back in the stakes company.
The number 5 is Hades, and let's take a look at his crowning achievement up until this point when he upset Fierceness in the Holy Bull back in early February, and he was good this day. Yes, he got a perfect trip, was able to set very slow fractions on the front end, but you have to like the way he changes over to his right lead, puts this field away in the final furlongs. Domestic Product, who was second here, he came back and validated this performance when he won the Tampa Bay Derby in his next start, and obviously the good Fierceness did not show up in the Holy Bull, but he did return to form, just dominating the Florida Derby in his next start. Hades obviously was not competitive in the Florida Derby. That race did not go according to plan. He drew it inside post position, tried to get forward under Paco Lopez, who was hustling him away from the starting gate, but he just got outrun to the turn, and from there got shuffled back, was actually last heading around the far turn. And to his credit, he did try to get up for 5th in the end, but was no factor and no real match for Fierceness. The connections obviously disappointed with that result, and now they're going to wheel him back in 2 weeks to try to pick up those Kentucky Derby qualifying points that he would need to get into the starting gate. I think Hades is better than his Florida Derby, Craig. They're going to put the blinkers on to see if he can get early position in this race.
Yeah, I personally didn't really like him going into that Florida Derby, but I think, like you, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. He did get a perfect trip in the Holy Bull, but he had a nightmare trip in the Florida Derby. So I don't think he's anywhere near as bad as what that race looks like. And also, when you look at that finish margin of 19 3/4 lengths, I mean, it just looks like he got absolutely destroyed. But keep in mind, the winner won by over 13 lengths. So it's not like he was drubbed by the rest of the field, and probably a much better effort than looks on paper.
Yeah, don't know if he's one of the more talented 3-year-olds in this crop, but this could be a better race for Hades to rebound from the way it sets up. The number 6 is How's Your Attitude, and he's going to be trying dirt for the first time. And here, all 3 of his prior starts have come over the synthetic surface at Turfway Park, and he's run fine. It took him 3 races to break his maiden, finally did so stretching out to the 2-turn mile last time, opened up a lead in the stretch, and was able to hold on that day. just has a lot of questions to answer, Craig, because he's got to get a lot faster and do so on a new surface.
For sure, the surface is a question. We have seen some horses come from Turfway on the synthetic surfaces and run well in some of these better 3-year-old races. But a bigger question is the speed figures, where he's yet to hit the triple-digit mark.
We're going to skip over the number 7, Ever Do It, who, like I said, already competed this week on Wednesday. The number 8 is Encino, and he's another one trying to make this switch from synthetic to dirt. All 3 of his prior starts have come at Turfway, and he really did look like a work in progress through those first 2 races. Got away to a poor start on debut, but closed well for second. In his second race, there's a point at the top of the stretch where it looks like he's going to throw in the towel, but his jockey, Axel Concepcion, really got into him, and he was able to get Encino to refocus, and he battled back gamely to fend off some horses closing on his outside. And it just seemed like mentally he put it all together last time in that John Battaglia Memorial. Got a wide trip from post 10, but still was able to stay on to beat that field. And the form of that race was flattered when Epic Ride came back to finish a very good third in the Bluegrass last week.
Yeah, Encino, I mean, he has the speed figure to compete if you trust that figure last time, which I do, that 113. It's just a matter of can he transfer his form over to dirt. Certainly seems like he has the breeding to do so. I have some questions. When I watch him race, he just kind of looks like he has that running style that fits the synthetic tracks a little bit better than dirt, but I'm not going to totally write him off in here.
Yeah, his dam is actually a half sister to Kentucky Derby winner Street Sense, and he's by a Kentucky Derby winner in Nyquist. So we'll see if he's one that could ultimately wind up in the Derby field. But I think he'd need some defections to do so, even if he won this Lexington. The number 9 is Liberal Arts, and he's another one of these horses that is wheeling back in 2 weeks after a disappointing, what was supposed to be final round prep for him. Was one of the horses that was attracting some support heading into the Arkansas Derby based on a closing effort in the Southwest and some solid 2-year-old form where he looked like a progressive sort. But from a trip standpoint, Craig, the Arkansas Derby was just a total disaster for Liberal Arts. He got way too rank heading into the clubhouse turn, had to steady a couple of times, bolted onto the backstretch, took out another rival with him. For a minute, looked like he was going to get eased on the backstretch of that race and ultimately passed a couple of tired rivals to finish 6th. He's certainly better than that, and it's not like he even earned that bad a speed figure last time.
No, that was a pretty quick race behind Muth. And as you said, the trip was just an absolute nightmare. A lot of it his own doing. So I think he definitely has a talent to win a race like this, but he's going to have to be much more professional.
Yeah, don't like to see that mental step backwards from a horse that had previously been pretty professional in his races. So potentially something was just bothering him in the Arkansas Derby last time. And then closing out the field is the number 10, Lucky Jeremy. He's a horse who was coming off a synthetic performance in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, where he really didn't run that badly to be 5th. He was only beaten about a neck from 2nd in what was a blanket finish behind Endlessly, who was the decisive winner. But he got a strong speed figure after setting a fast pace that day. And he's a horse who had handled the dirt in the past. His Sunland Derby effort was pretty good. Stronghold flattered that form when he came back to win the Santa Anita Derby in his next start, and just seems like he is the one that is likely to send for the lead in a race where doesn't really feel like anybody else possesses the early speed that he does.
No, I was a little skeptical of that Sunland Derby when I made the speed figure for it, but it's come back and held up. As you said, Stronghold came back to run well. I think the runner-up won without it, albeit with a slower speed figure. But then he took even a step forward speed figure wise in that direct Jeff Ruby Stakes, setting the pace, a very fast pace that day. And I think things are just going to get a lot easier for him. So he's definitely a strong wire threat, in my opinion.
Let's throw up our picks for this Grade 3 Lexington, the final Kentucky Derby points race. And I agree, Craig. I think the number 10 Lucky Jeremy is dangerous. You put him on top. I've got him in the mix, but he does feel like a real gate-to-wire threat in this race.
Yeah, I went with Lucky Jeremy on top just because I think he's going to get things his own way on the front end. And that's always dangerous at Keeneland, particularly at this mile and the 16th distance. If he's not able to see it out and Liberal Arts is able to put things together, I just think he's a lot better than what we saw from him last time.
I know we disagree a little bit on the number 5 Hades. I'm going to give this horse one more chance. I did like his first few starts, and I just thought it was the wrong trip for him last time in the Florida Derby. I did think he was training well going into that race, and I just want to give him one more chance as he wheels back, putting the blinkers on for Trader Joe Orsino. So the number 5 Hades for me, and the number 10 Lucky Jeremy for Craig in the Grade 3 Lexington Stakes on Saturday at Keeneland. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.